So, there's all this debate about whether or not stories such as the Odyssey should be left alone and not remade for modern audiences. But then I must ask, hasn't Sword Art Online already become the modern version of the Odyssey? One fit for that same modern audience. Let us start with Kirito, the main character. Fits all the characteristics of an unsung hero who feared that his advanced level was causing the death of those around him, because at one point Kirito did belong to a guild, the Moonlit Black Cats, and that guild was very pleased that he had such a way with the sword. But then there came a point where a member of this guild, Saki, was scared of going on the front lines. And when she finally did go on the front lines because she felt confident to go with Kirito, she ended up getting killed by the boss. And then the other surviving member of the Moonlit Black Cats blamed Kirito because of his advanced level and because there was a negative perception of being a beta. And then there was Odysseus. He's always known for his brains. But does he use his brains in the right way? No, not really. The kings of Greece were baying for a war against Troy, because that is what a lot of kings of old wanted to do. And what better way than to go to war than to retrieve a woman, Helen. And Odysseus set up the precedent for this war because he made each of these kings promise that whoever Helen decided to be her husband, they would have to defend her marriage, even if it meant going to war. So of course, Paris stealing her away was the perfect reason to go off to war. And once again, there's Kirito. He didn't want to get stuck in the death game, Sword Art Online, but he did use video games as a way to escape his family life. Because it is the trait of an adopted child that if they are not told by their caregivers as children that they are adopted, if they find out when they're older, then they have an identity crisis. In Kirito's case, it turned out that his mother was his aunt and his sister was his cousin. So this caused him to create distance and to escape into video games so he wouldn't have to confront the hurt of learning this fact.
Kazuto stood there looking at me, and then he told me he wanted to know who his real parents were. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. He was only 10, but here's the thing. Somehow he logged onto the Citizens Registration Network and found the file.
Odysseus, though, he had the tendency to drag those around him into dangerous situations. Take Achilles. His mother Thetis, the goddess, was desperate to hide him away at the court of King Lycomedes as one of his foster daughter called Priya, and Thetis wanted to hide him away because she knew that if he went off to the Trojan War, he would not survive. Odysseus also knew that Achilles fighting in that war was key to the kings of Greece winning. So he drew Achilles out with a love of the sword, because of course princesses like their jewels and clothes, but men, especially men like Achilles, half-gods, oh, their love of sword, their love of the battle is what dragged Achilles out of hiding. Now Kirito, he withdrew into the world of video games, but he did not intend to get stuck into Sword Art Online. but it was also very aware of hostility that was growing against other beta testers such as himself. For example, with the first boss, Diabel was the one who led everyone in the Town of Beginnings to fight against the first boss to give them a sense of hope that the game could be beaten. However, the final weapon was different than during the beta test, and Diabel was struck down. And it was as Diabel said his final words that Kirito figured out that Diabel was also a beta tester. And there was Kibao, who blamed Kirito for Diabel's death. Now, Kirito couldn't exactly tell Kibao that, Diabel was a beta tester and he was confident in the mechanics that the boss would use, because then a lot of people would have been angry at Diabel and it might have ruined the idea that they had of Diabel. So when Kirito was labelled as a beta tester, he immediately realised that this could put other beta testers in danger. It could put Diabel's memory in disrepute. So he quickly worked to make sure that he wasn't just any old beta tester. He implied that he went far above the other beta testers. So this is why he was called a cheater, and hence beta tester and cheater becomes beta. And in a death game where people feared not only dying at the hands of the bosses in the game, but also against those stronger than them, turning the blade against them, Kirito became a threat, but he tried to protect the other beta testers.
He's a beater! A beater? Yeah, that's good. I like it. Okay. You can call me a beater. Just make sure you don't confuse me with those beta testers anymore.
Not unlike, Odysseus didn't do that. Odysseus, he always thought about himself first, and his crew meant to serve him. They were meant to serve him because he was king of Ithaca, he was entitled, and his crew should be more than willing to die for him. You see, Odysseus liked the idea of outsmarting Polyphemus, the Cyclops, who had eaten other sailors stranded on his island before. But as they escaped from Polyphemus's island, Odysseus blurted out his name because he was proud and he thought that he had escaped from Polyphemus. But of course, Polyphemus's father is Poseidon, king of the seas, and what should have been a direct route back to Ithaca turned into a horrendous storm where all his crew members died because of his hubris. And then there's Kirito. Asuna wanted to fight alongside him, but Kirito feared for her safety. Kirito didn't treat Asuna like Odysseus did his crew. Oh no. Kirito made a deal with Heathcliff that Asuna could not physically fight against him, because Heathcliff was the game's master, was Akihiko Kayaba, the man who created Sword Art Online, so he could control the players' avatars. Kirito was honourable to do this. He knew that he was the strongest player. He knew that he had to face Heathcliff. And he knew that he would probably be the only one able to free all the other players in the game, even if he had to sacrifice himself. And he was certain that if he did this, he might die, but at least Asuna would be free. This was his last potentially dying wish, that Asuna would live back in the real world where she always wanted to return to. Odysseus, though, he was not faithful to his wife, Penelope. Oh no. Not only did he cause his crew to die in the storm sent by Poseidon because of his hubris in finally defeating Polyphemus, he also accepted Circe's hospitality, stayed there for many years, fathered children with her, completely forgot about his wife and his eldest son back in Ithaca, and only left the island because Zeus sent Hermes to remind him that he needed to go home. Let us continue with Asuna. Asuna was an outsider. She was not a gamer. Her elder brother was the gamer, but she was the one who put on the headset. She was the one who got trapped inside the game, and she was the one who closed ranks with Kirito because she joined the guilds. She rose in rank. She built on her sword skills, and she became the second in command of the Knights of the Blood Oath, which incidentally is like being commander of the Knights of the Blood Oath, because Heathcliff, well, if Kirito was labelled as a beater, Heathcliff was 1,000 times worse than that, because he was using the very system to cheat.
An escort. It's lame. The guild didn't have all these rules and regulations before. We used to be really small. But then, more and more people joined up. After that, when we became the strongest guild, everything started getting weird. Well, I'm probably making a bigger deal out of it than it is.
In the meantime, there's Penelope, Odysseus' wife. She was the queen who did not change. She was the one who stayed at home in Ithaca, raised Odysseus' eldest son. All the while, there were suitors trying to eat her out of house and home, because after 10 years, many thought Odysseus had died, and these suitors were certain if they would marry Penelope, they would become the king of Ithaca. Because after all, Odysseus' son could not take over from Odysseus because his status of being alive or dead was not certain, and he did not have the respect of those around him. The sort of respect that Odysseus used to get his crew killed. Now take Asuna. She was the first swordsmaster that Kirito created. Kirito, the player who tried to stay in the shadows, did not want to join guilds, did not want to indirectly kill those around him, because he drew danger to himself, because when you're an advanced player, you tend to draw the attention of the more powerful bosses. But Asuna, she began her way of the sword. First time she teamed up with Kirito during the first boss, and they tag teamed to take down the boss when the other failed. Kirito, of course, also climbed the ropes too, showing that even though he was hesitant to make connections with other people because of his family life, those he did make connections with, they stayed alive because of him. And then there's Penelope. She's always romanticized, especially in classical studies and other such ways of studying the likes of the Iliad and the Odyssey. But in reality, she is the bride that Odysseus ran away from to go to war instead. Because in reality, Odysseus could have stayed on Ithaca, raised his son, made sure that his son would become king after him. But he was an entitled king. He thought he could use his brains to win the Trojan War, when in reality, even though the Greeks won the war against the Trojans, those kings eventually lost their lives one by one by one. Odysseus was no different. Now Asuna, she is perhaps one of the only players that Kirito would come out of hiding for. Asuna was also the one that Kirito fell in love with. Someone that Kirito would fight for. Someone that Kirito realized he had to liberate from the game, from the death game. And Kirito, well, Asuna was perhaps the first person that Kirito created a strong emotional bond with after hiding away from the real world into video games because of his strained family life. And it's with Asuna that they had their own detective arc, 2 episodes, about deaths in safe zones, and the idea of how dynamics in a relationship can change. For example, there was the situation with Griselda and her surviving guild members. And her surviving guild members wanted to know who had sent Griselda into a trap to be killed by members of the Laughing Coffin. Now, the members of her guild were certain that it was one of them. They did not think it was Griselda's husband because they thought that Griselda and her husband were only married in-game, not in real life. Turns out Griselda's husband was a real narcissist and could not handle how, in the real world, he was on top and Griselda was the one that stood below him. Meanwhile, Griselda found her stride in Sword Art Online, and her husband feared dying. But he also realized he could use death as a way to make sure that the dynamic between him and Griselda as husband and wife never changed. That when they returned to the real world, Griselda would never be the confident one, never seek to leave him because he'd already killed her. And then there's Penelope. She was the one left behind, the one that Odysseus married because he was a king and she was an eligible one for him to marry, to have a son with. But Odysseus was not loyal to her, did not work together, and indeed, he even betrayed her by having children with Circe. In the meantime, Penelope could have married any one of those suitors who were eating her out of house and home. Asuna, in the meantime, well, she overcame Heathcliff's programming to not get physically involved in the battle against him and Kirito. She stood between Kirito and Heathcliff and got slashed down by Heathcliff, suggesting that their love was strong, especially because they worked together, rather than Asuna simply being a set piece awaiting the commands of her husband, Odysseus, the king. Penelope's situation, though, this is where I understand why the likes of the Odyssey would want to be remade for a modern audience. Because Penelope was a wife scorned. Her husband abandoned her for, it turned out to be 18 years, actually. And Odysseus did return, only for his illegitimate son with Circe to accidentally kill him. Now, supposedly Penelope fell in love with Circe's son, but there's also suggestions that she was ordered to marry Circe's son by Olympian decree, meaning that she never had Asuna's sense of agency. She was never Odysseus's partner. She was a wife and not a person who was allowed to love and to live in the way that she wanted to. And lastly, there is Akihiko Kayaba, the mad scientist, the programmer who would become God. He would become the ultimate games master of the first virtual reality, massive multiplayer online role-playing game. Most would find it enough that players would enjoy and experience their game to face recognition. he shut them into Sword Art Online. He raised the stake to such an extent that if you were killed in the game, then the nerve kill would kill you in real life by frying your brain. This is how he became God, by controlling life and death. And if Akihiko Kayaba was the one who swayed the direction of the events in Sword Art Online, then the gods of Olympus are the ones who sway the direction of the Trojan War by using the Trojan War as their chessboard, because of course the gods of Olympus didn't see humanity as individuals with free will, but rather as pawns to play with. And this is very much like Akihiko Kayaba. He used the players in Sword Art Online as pawns to play with, and many of these pawns, well, they feared him. Now, there is not much difference between when you fear someone when you worship them. You see, Saki from Moonlit Black Cats, if she played Sword Art Online in the normal way, where she could regenerate, then perhaps she would not have feared fighting on the front lines. She could have been strong because she could have fought, died, and tried again. Akihiko Kayaba took that away from her, much like Zeus took away Menelaus' chance to withdraw from the Trojan War, because Menelaus quickly understood that the gods of Olympus were playing with him, because initially Zeus had decided that the Trojans would win, so the Greeks had a losing streak, even though Menelaus had sacrificed his firstborn daughter so they would have safe passage by sea to Troy. But oh no, the gods of Olympus would not allow Menelaus to withdraw. They were playing a game, and of course Athena was the messenger who stoked Menelaus' sense of manhood, that if he withdrew from war, then he would be ostracized once he returned to his home. And this is the reason why they attacked Troy anew. When in reality, did Paris really steal Helen? Or did Helen grow bored of her marriage and seek a new adventure? After all, Agamemnon was a typical Greek, someone who Helen did not have much fun with. She could be an everyday Greek queen, but she could not have the thrill that she was seeking. The thrill that Paris gave her, the Trojan prince, incidentally. And then there is Akihiko Kayaba. Yes, he is God, a death god even, but he is the ultimate gamer, perhaps an even more dedicated gamer than Kirito himself, because most game developers like to watch other people playing their games. Many writers take pride in seeing others read their work. Akihiko Kayaba, though, he was a gamer. He was a gamer in the sense that Kirito even acknowledged that it's no fun watching other people play games. It's more fun playing a game for yourself. Hence taking on the role of Heathcliff, the same Heathcliff that Kirito fought against to liberate everyone else in the game. And then there is Zeus, the king of the Olympian gods. Now usually he is represented by a set of scales because he makes sure to maintain divine order. But this would suggest that Zeus had integrity, that he would not be swayed by petty squabbles, that he would not be inclined to trade this favorite king for that favorite king, and he would not be swayed by Hera drawing him into a negotiation such as that, because after all, Hera decided that she wanted the Trojans to lose and offered something to Zeus instead. This offer was great enough for Zeus to agree, and this is why suddenly the Greeks went from losing to winning, and the Trojans went from thinking that their patron god Apollo was on their side to suddenly having abandoned them. Hence their praying to the temple, and the whole thing with Cassandra rejecting Apollo and then none of her prophecies being believed because he cursed her, because oh no, a mortal did not have the right to reject the advances of a god. They were not good enough to do that, because after all, the gods were above humanity. They used them like playthings. In Sword Art Online though, Akihiko Kayaba, yes, he was the god of Sword Art Online, but he was not like the gods of Olympus. He could be a god that could be beaten. He could be taken down with that stone, such as the stone that took down the giant in the Bible. And the one that would defeat this god was Kirito, because after all, Kirito's beta status pretty much made him a god himself, but a god who strove to liberate the others in SAO from the tyrannical god that Akihiko Kayaba had become. Kirito proved himself as the savior of those trapped in Sword Art Online. Odysseus did not. Odysseus put his crew at risk by earning the ire of Poseidon. He put his crew at risk by sending them on ahead to face Circe. And this is where I must conclude that the Odyssey in its original form should be left alone. There should be no attempts to modify it for a modern audience, because it was written at a time that the values in that story reflected the society in which the events of that story happened. Instead, rather than recycling old ideas, we as the modern audience should seek new stories that make up a new canon of classical Western literature that we can refer to.
Now, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Many thanks.